Some dynasties are remembered for cruelty. Their names stay alive through fear, through purges, through what they openly did to other people. Some are remembered for achievement. They built, they expanded, they stabilized a broken age and left behind something that lasted. The Western Jin sits in a darker place than either of those. Not because it was the cruelest, not because it was the strongest, but because it failed after doing something immense. That is what makes it hard to look away from. It did not collapse before success. It collapsed after reunification. China had been divided for decades. The age of the three kingdoms had exhausted men, land, grain, armies, and trust. Then the Western Jin reunified the realm. For a moment, the empire stood whole again. That should have been the beginning of recovery. It was not. It became the beginning of another failure. And that failure was not small. It was not the failure of one battle, not the failure of one weak man alone. It was the failure to keep a restored center alive. That is why the judgment on the Western Jin is so severe. It won what many others could not win. Then it could not protect what it had won. A dynasty may be excused, to some degree, when it is born into hopelessness. The Western Jin was not born into hopelessness. It inherited a damaged world, yes, but not a dead one, not a world beyond repair. The chance was real. The opening was real. So the responsibility was real too. What the Jin received was more than territory. It received a historical moment. After long division, reunification carries its own force. People do not see it only as conquest. They see it as the return of order. That mattered. It gave the dynasty legitimacy before it had fully proven durability. The new regime did not have to invent political meaning from nothing. It could stand before the realm as the power that had ended division.
That is an enormous advantage in Chinese history.
To reunify is not merely to win land. It is to claim that chaos can end. The Western Jin began with that advantage in its hands. That fact must stay in view the whole time, because once we remember that, the later collapse looks worse. Much worse. This was not a dynasty with no room to act. It had room. It had prestige. It had momentum. What it lacked was not opportunity. What it lacked was lasting political design. That is the real center of the case against it. The Western Jin did not simply lose power. It failed to turn victory into order. Military success came first. Durable structure did not follow. And if that sounds abstract, it should not, because empires do not survive on triumph alone. Conquest can open the gate. It cannot, by itself, keep the house standing. That second task is harder. It is slower. It is less glorious. It is the work of preservation. The Western Jin did the dramatic part. It did not secure the difficult part. At first, that weakness was easy to miss. Early success can hide a lot. A victorious founder gives a dynasty light, and in that light, cracks often disappear for a while. Under Emperor Wu of Jin, the dynasty still looked strong. That appearance was not entirely false. Reunification was real. Prestige was real. Relief after war was real. But appearances can flatter a system that is not yet safe. And that is what happened here. The empire looked whole. The map looked whole. The structure underneath was less secure. That difference between appearance and capacity is crucial. It would haunt the dynasty from within. The Western Jin did not fall first at the frontier. It fell first at the center. The deepest weakness did not begin as a foreign invasion. It began as a problem of rule. Power inside the dynasty had not been arranged safely enough. The throne stood at the center,
But too many dangerous forces stood too near it. That weakness had roots in the dynasty's own rise.
The Jin emerged from the Sima family's seizure of power from Cao Wei. But usurpation alone does not doom a dynasty. Chinese history had seen more than one replacement of one house by another. The more important question is different. After taking power, what habits remain? What logic of rule survives the seizure? And here the answer is troubling. The Sima family rose through control of court machinery from inside the old state. They did not arrive as a fully separate power building a new order from outside. They captured the center from within. That matters. Because a family that rises through regency, manipulation, and command of the inner machinery may learn how to take power very well. But taking power and stabilizing power are not the same craft. They are not even close. Court skill can win a throne. It cannot, by itself, secure an empire over generations. Patronage, appointments, factional maneuver, calculated removal of rivals. These things are useful in ascent. They are far less useful when the question becomes, how will the system survive a weaker ruler, a disputed succession, a tense court, and ambitious kin? That is where the Western Jin was weak. It changed the ruling house. It did not redesign the political logic deeply enough. The dynasty inherited institutions. It also inherited habits. Those habits had been sharpened in struggle for control. They were not naturally suited to calm imperial durability. The result was dangerous from the start, though not yet fatal. The center had been captured. It had not been remade securely enough. And in a newly reunified empire, that matters more than ever, because what war has brought together can still fall apart very fast. A founder can hold many things together through personal weight. That is one of history's oldest patterns. The problem comes after him, always after him. Once the founder is gone, institutions speak louder than victory. Structure matters more than memory. That is when the Western Jin begins to look much weaker. Not at its brightest moment. Right after. To understand why, we have to look at how power was organized inside the dynasty. And here the flaw is hard to miss. The Jin gave substantial strength to imperial princes. The reasoning behind that choice was not irrational. The court had reason to fear domination by ministers or outside figures. That danger had existed before. Trusting kinsmen could seem safer than trusting men beyond the clan. On paper, it could even look prudent. But on paper is not where dynasties live. Dynasties live in succession crises, in weak reigns, in moments when motives sharpen. And under those conditions, empowered princes are not merely protectors, they become political actors. Once a prince has title, legitimacy, access, regional standing, and military potential, he is no longer just an arm of the throne. He becomes a man who can move, a man who can intervene, a man who can claim to act for the dynasty. That is the danger, because the language of loyalty can hide the beginnings of seizure. In a stable reign, the princes may still look manageable. Under a weak emperor, their meaning changes. What once looked like a wall around the throne starts to look like several gates into it. That was the trap built into the Western Jin. It thought it was surrounding the center with defenders. In truth, it was multiplying centers of intervention. Too many men could claim the right to act in the dynasty's name. Once that happens, The line between preserving the throne and controlling the throne becomes dangerously thin. This is not only a moral problem, it is an institutional one, a structural one. A dynasty cannot rely on the hope that every future ruler will be strong enough to keep all these forces in order. Good design must survive weakness. The Western Jin did not. That failure would become unbearable under Emperor Wu, but the weakness existed before him. It had already been planted into the arrangement of power. He did not invent the instability. He inherited it. That point matters. Because weak rulers exist in many dynasties. A durable order can absorb a weak man at the top for a time. A fragile order cannot. The Western Jin proved fragile, extremely fragile. Too much power stood too close to the emperor. Too few restraints stood between that power and direct intervention. Once the throne ceased to stand clearly above every competing force, the whole logic of the court changed. The emperor became less a source of command, more a prize. Whoever spoke through the throne could speak with the voice of legitimacy. That made control of the emperor worth fighting for. And once factions begin fighting over possession of the dynasty's voice, politics becomes something uglier. It is no longer mainly administration. It is no longer even normal court rivalry. It becomes a struggle over lawful command itself. That is one of the most dangerous stages a dynasty can enter. Because legitimacy still exists, but it no longer stands above conflict. It gets dragged into conflict, used inside conflict, turned into a weapon. Under those conditions, every faction can call itself loyal. Every intervention can be dressed in proper language. That makes restraint harder. It makes violence easier. It makes confusion fatal. The throne still matters immensely, but it matters now as an object to be controlled. That is a terrible thing for an empire. Once the center becomes usable in turn by rival forces, it is no longer a stable center. The Western Jin reached exactly that condition, and once it did, eruption was only a matter of time. But imperial princes were not the whole problem. Around the ruling house stood another force, great aristocratic families and elite networks. Their influence shaped political life deeply, sometimes as much as formal office did. That matters because it means institutions were never acting alone. Power kept passing through status, lineage, marriage, patronage, reputation. The state still had offices. It still had hierarchy. It still had ceremony and procedure. But a court can look complete and still be thinner than it seems. That too was true of the Western Jin. On paper, the emperor stood at the summit. In practice, command often traveled through social channels not fully controlled by the center. That is a dangerous condition in quiet times. In crisis, it is worse. Because when decisions must be fast, unified, and heavy, a divided elite world slows everything down. Orders still go out, but whether they bite depends on who supports them, who delays them, who quietly reshapes them. That is how a state starts to lose directness. Not all at once, slowly. It keeps the face of empire. It begins to lose its grip. Ritual can conceal that for a while. So can the prestige of a founder. But when succession pressure, factional struggle, or military danger arrives, the inner weakness shows itself very quickly. Then the gap between appearance and capacity becomes devastating. The Western Jin would pay for exactly that gap. By the reign of Emperor Wu, the hidden weaknesses were no longer hidden. They stood exposed at the center of the court. Later tradition remembered him as a deeply weak ruler. Perhaps not every tale about him is fair in every detail, but the larger point survives any correction. He could not control a court that was already unstable, already crowded with dangerous actors, already vulnerable by design. That is why this cannot be reduced to personality alone. One weak man should not be enough to throw a reunified empire toward ruin. If he is enough, then the structure was bad before him. Bad in ways the dynasty failed to cure. Under Emperor Wu, the emperor's person became politically invaluable. Whoever controlled him could act in the name of the state. That made the struggle around him fierce, immediate, and deeply destructive. Everyone wanted proximity to the source of legitimacy. Palace figures, relatives, ministers, princes, all moved toward the same point. Once too many forces move toward one point at once, explosion is near. The court stopped being a place of rule. It became a place of seizure, a place where the empire's voice could be captured, and from there, the road to the War of the Eight Princes was short, terribly short. This war was not an incidental disturbance. It was not some colorful episode of palace intrigue. It was the clearest expression of the dynasty's internal failure, a civil struggle inside the ruling house itself. That is what made it so destructive. The men involved were not outsiders battering the gates. They stood inside the structure of rule. They had legitimacy, they had rank, they had claims. In other words, no, better to say it plainly. The state was being torn by men who belonged to its own design. That is the disaster, not rebellion from the margins. Conflict at the heart. When frontier enemies rise, a strong court may still isolate them. When the imperial house itself turns into a battlefield, the whole center is dragged in. The War of the Eight Princes did not merely embarrass the dynasty. It consumed it. It consumed time, troops, trust, administrative continuity, obedience. Men were promoted, displaced, recalled, purged, restored, and purged again. That rhythm destroys stable government. The court ceased to act like a center with one will. It lurched from faction to faction. Every shift wore down confidence. Every purge thinned capacity. Every victory prepared another round of instability. That is one of the hardest kinds of damage to repair. Because it is not only material. Money can sometimes be raised again. Troops can sometimes be recruited again. Credibility is harder. Once officials and generals no longer know who truly speaks for the center, caution replaces obedience. Once promises from court become unreliable, local calculation begins. That is how imperial capacity starts to drain away. The provinces do not need to rebel all at once for a dynasty to weaken. It is enough that they stop trusting the center fully. And when that trust weakens, the imperial command grows dim. It still exists. It no longer reaches as before. The War of the Eight Princes damaged exactly that reach. It hollowed the dynasty from within while the outer shell still stood. Form remained, function decayed. The emperor still existed, the court still existed, the language of empire still existed. The strength behind them was failing. That is what makes this period so tragic. The empire did not disappear in a clean instant. It kept standing long enough for its weakness to become visible, long enough to show what had gone wrong. And once the center had been hollowed in that way, external pressure became far more dangerous. This is where easy explanations often mislead. It is tempting to blame everything on outside attack. That is too simple. Outside pressure becomes decisive fastest when the inside has already come apart. The Western Jin was not first shattered from outside and then thrown into disorder. The sequence ran the other way. First came internal political ruin. Then came the inability to answer external threats. That order matters. It changes the judgment completely. Years of internal war had disrupted command, coordination, logistics, and trust. These are not small losses. They are the deep mechanics of survival. An empire is not strong because it has soldiers on paper. It is strong when command, legitimacy, administration, and force still reinforce one another. By this stage, Western Jin had weakened all four. It still had troops, but it could not use them with enough unity. It still had officials, but the state behind them was thinner. It still had titles and laws, but laws and titles do not move men very far if the center no longer carries full weight. That is why later military defeat should not be read narrowly. Battle loss was the visible expression. Political breakdown was the deeper cause. Once the center can no longer coordinate defense reliably, defeat becomes only a matter of time. Northern conditions grew more unstable as the pull of the center weakened. Groups once contained within the imperial framework found more room to act. That strategic change did not happen in a day, but it was real. A weakened court makes every frontier more difficult, every local calculation more dangerous, every hesitation more costly. The Western Jin had entered that phase. The empire still existed. It no longer functioned as a full center. Then came the fall of Luoyang, and with it the illusion of easy recovery collapsed. Luoyang was not just a city, it was the political heart of the regime. Authority radiated from it. Ritual gave shape to power there. The dynasty presented itself to the realm from there. So when Luoyang fell, the Jin did not merely lose urban ground, it lost the place from which its authority had visibly stood. That mattered in two ways at once. Practically, command was shaken. Symbolically, continuity was shaken. Records, offices, chains of communication, ritual presence, political memory. All of these suffer when the capital is lost. A strong dynasty may relocate and recover. A badly weakened one rarely does so cleanly. The Western Jin had already been worn down before losing the capital. That made the blow much heavier. Subjects could see it. Rivals could see it. Local actors could see it. The center had been pierced. And when the center is visibly pierced, loyalty starts to waver. Calculation spreads. Then Chang'an fell as well. That ended any serious hope that this was merely a local disturbance. If one great center falls, men may still dream of reorganization elsewhere. When both major centers are lost in sequence, the scale of failure becomes unmistakable. At that point, northern China no longer had a stable Jin center holding it together. The name of the empire might remain. The function had broken. That is the proper way to read the end of the Western Jin. Not as a simple military misfortune. It was the spatial expression of an earlier political collapse. First, the center became weak in rule. Then it became weak in space. The capitals did not create the truth. They revealed it. By the time the last emperors faced the final blows, too much had already been lost. Too many capacities had already been broken. They were reacting to collapse more than preventing it. That is a very different position. So why does the Western Jin deserve such harsh judgment? Not because every failed dynasty deserves equal condemnation. It deserves harsh judgment because of what it had achieved before failing. It restored unity, then failed to preserve the minimum conditions needed for that unity to live. That is a grave historical waste. The achievement was real. The opportunity was real. So the failure is harder to forgive. The Western Jin matters because it proves something severe. Conquest is only the opening act of dynastic success. The harder task is preservation. And on that hardest task, the Western Jin failed badly. It reunified China, but it could not protect the meaning of reunification itself.